Welcome back to Jacket Sports Weekly for the first episode of the spring semester, and we have an action-packed one starting off with wrestling, men's and women's basketball, and then men's and women's indoor track and field were all in action this past week. I'm Tyler Zeman. Alongside me here today is Jesse Cain, and we're going to get right into it, Jesse, with the wrestling team. The team so far this year hasn't had the success that maybe they have wanted altogether, but individually there are some big names. Colby Morris, who is undefeated right now, coming off of a 10-0 major decision win against Teal this past Friday. Luke Levanaway also won, and then Aiden Bischoff, who's now on 2 straight victories. These individuals have really just stepped up.
Yeah, an undefeated player or an undefeated member of the team on a team that hasn't won a match yet. They're 0-13. They're really struggling. They've got a new coach, so you can give them, a little break there with the new coach involved. But yeah, Colby Morris going to the PAC champions, we can assume, and 18-0 on the year. I'd like to talk a little bit about Aiden Bischoff because he did do well with their past invitational this past weekend. He was also a member of the football team, and I myself know him, and his work ethic is undeniable. He's a great athlete, spectacular athlete, and I know all the work he put into losing weight, gaining muscle, all for this upcoming season. He's a sophomore, a great prospect for the wrestling team with this upcoming years, and Colby Morris only a junior. So I think the wrestling team can only go up from here. They have one more match before the PAC champions at the Messiah Open. But until then, it might just be looking forward to next year and see how Colby Morris does at the PAC champions.
Yeah, and Morris, a guy who went to the same high school as Rocky. Rocky, the last Waynesburg wrestling member to go on and compete on the national stage. And right now, Colby Morris has really put himself in a position, barring some bad performances maybe at the PAC championship rounds coming up, like you talked about. He's right now on pace to potentially go on and perform on the national stage, which would be huge for this wrestling program, like you said, under a first-year head coach.
Yeah, and the wrestling season, it's a little difficult because of all the breaks involved. All winter sports are like that, but you look at these guys and they have to focus on what they're eating, their workout regimen, all of that, because they have to maintain weight. No other sport that we have has to maintain weight like that. So it's a very difficult season for the wrestlers. And with a younger team, those struggles can become apparent just because of the lack of discipline. And they did have that entire coaching transition with Coach Ron Headley taking a step back from the wrestling program with his success he's had over time. So I'm really excited for Waynesburg's future in wrestling, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the winter sports this season.
Yeah, and although they may be in a rough spot, like you said, there are a few names to keep an eye on going into next year and following for the rest of the season. But we're going to move on to men's basketball right now, a team that is maybe a little bit underwhelming than what many expected from them this year. 5-13 overall, 3-11 in conference play, and right now on the outside looking in at the PAC tournament coming up, 3 games out of that last place spot. But they do have a little bit of coming off of a big win against St. Vincent just last week, 70-61, and Anton Baker, who's been very big in their success so far this season, played a massive role, 18 points, 9 rebounds, almost a double-double. He's one of those guys that has just been outstanding and someone that you're really excited to see headed into next year.
Yeah, there is a lot of hope for this team coming in this season because all of the starters for this season are returning players from the past couple seasons. Matt Popek's injury definitely plays a toll on this team, especially if they can get to the postseason. But we'll talk about that later when Carter Newcome comes on here. And actually, the team's been having just as much success scoring points without Popek. So they are doing a successful job with Coach Fusina of passing around the ball and the points. And it just comes with who's going to score the most points for them. Anton Baker did it this past weekend. And, Jansen Knotts can step up as well. And Felberg had a good bit of points also.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, not in a very good spot to potentially make the playoffs with their remaining games. They have Westminster coming up here this Wednesday. Last time they faced Westminster, it was on the road, 72-59 loss. The only team left on the schedule for the Yellow Jackets that they beat was Franciscan. So the odds, again, are definitely stacked against them to get into the playoffs. And that's the same thing with the women's side of things. 2-16 overall, 2-11 in the conference. Again, on the outside looking in, 3 games out of a playoff spot, and without one of their main offensive producers in Avery Robinson, not on the team, they're definitely going into a tough stretch to end the season.
Yeah, they've only got one senior, Nika Dansby, and she's been doing somewhat of what she's been doing all year. In the past years, we expected to see her grow just a little more, but she's working with a very young team and only a couple juniors. And matter of fact, Avery Robinson no longer in the team. That also hurts the upperclassmen. So the team is very young under an experienced Coach Jones. It depends on how these players will develop and grow. They're gaining experience, and especially with this upcoming couple of games, you can only imagine if they don't make the postseason or things don't work out with a couple wins, they're going to get those freshmen even more experience and see where they go from there, and recruitment from there as well.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in a little bit with our analyst Spencer Frattare, but Coach Jones made a lot of changes over the winter break, and maybe now on a 5-game losing streak, on the outside looking in, maybe we see some changes from him, but we'll also talk about a little bit about the future, because they do have some bright faces on this team that have a lot of potential going into next year.
Yeah, they struggled to recruit, or maybe they just didn't feel the need to recruit as much the years prior to this, but they had a large freshman recruitment come in this season, and we've even seen a lot of people from the local area, couple from Emacito, from Brownsville, and then you've got Waynesburg Central with Clara Page Miller as well. So, I mean, the basketball in this area is pretty good. You've got a lot of good players and potential in your backyard, so it all goes from recruitment and, what traits these players develop going forward.
Yeah, a lot of interesting potential with this team headed into the future. We'll see how that all plays out. But we're going to move on to the men's and women's indoor track and field team, because these teams, last time out at Muskingum, they placed pretty well as a team. Women's 2nd out of 8 teams, men the 6th out of 8 teams. So the women's doing better than the men's, but these teams both have great individual performances from a lot of individuals at this last event.
Yeah, when we have Meg Berry on later, we'll discuss, how her as a part of the team, kind of the transition period from the indoor track to outdoor track. And I almost imagine that it would be like warming up for the main outdoor track and field, because in my high school, that's all we had. Indoor is more for colleges and higher up programs. So some of these events aren't all that familiar with the players and the runners, but like you said, the women's team 2nd out of the 8 teams at the Muskingum meet. But how can you not talk about Catherine Henderson breaking 4 school records, and 2 of which she already held for herself? And Meg Berry will discuss more about her, but just an amazing athlete. And they have a potential for their upcoming offseason, and then right back into it with outdoor track and field.
Yeah, both of these teams always competitive throughout the PAC tournament in the outdoor season. So really just starting to build a very solid foundation headed into the later part of the spring semester. But like I said, we'll have more coverage of all of these sports in the upcoming segments. You're watching Jacket Sports Weekly.
Now swinging back to Wilt. Wilt inside. Hop step, kick out to Scheidt. Scheidt, corner, Knotts, 3 ball. Got it! We're all tied up! 64-64. 1:12 left to play.
He's going to have to chuck up a shot soon, too, on the shot clock. Ball is around. There's Jake Scheidt. And here comes Jake Scheidt and Baker. Scheidt, the lob to Baker, slaps it home! Anton Baker!
Welcome back here on Jacket Sports Weekly, and we're going to open up with some men's basketball talk. We're joined by our analyst, Carter Newcome. And Carter, this is a men's team, 5-13 overall, 3-11 in the conference, 9th in the PAC, but they're coming off a major win at St. Vincent. They beat the Bearcats 70-61. What were some things that you saw from them in that game that you really liked?
Well, I mean, they played good defense for one to start things off. I mean, they only had 61 points, and Jaden Giles, one of the best players for St. Vincent and young guys in the conference, did get hurt midway through this game, but Waynesburg, they started the game on a 13-2 run, and really St. Vincent never really got in a groove on offense for one thing, and then Waynesburg, they only attempted 44 shots from the field in this game, but they did shoot 50%. They shot 22 of 44, and they only shot 4 3-pointers, but they did make all 4 of them. So from Waynesburg's perspective, I mean, they played the kind of game of basketball that Tim Fusino likes. They're going to play a low-scoring defensive basketball game, high-quality shots, and a good field goal percentage. That's the kind of game that they want to play and win. And, yeah, a guy like Anton Baker, he's going to have to step up. 18 points, 9 rebounds, can't ask for much more from him. And, between that and shooting good at the foul line, Ryan Felberg, 14 points in this one, 10 of 12 from the free throw line. So that's kind of ended up being the difference in this game because there was 50 total fouls in this contest, 24 from Waynesburg and 26 from St. Vincent.
So they played team basketball, got the win. They've really struggled pulling out a couple of the close games with their past games. But do you think, Coach Fusino is so focused on the team play, and then you have a couple players step up. Do you think Anton Baker can do that day in, day out for the Jackets?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can say that because, I mean, he came in here the last 2 years. He's gotten some sporadic time, and he kind of looks like he was kind of a little bit, I'm not going to say lost out there, but like he was still learning the game, how to play college basketball, and the adjustment. This year, that's been the biggest thing for this team is he seems like he's at home out there now. He's comfortable, and he's really been probably the biggest catalyst of their team's success here late in the year and going down the stretch of games that they need to win to get into the playoffs here. But for Anton Baker, I think he's been electric, and he's now their leading scorer and rebounder without Matt Popek on the floor.
Yeah, so they're 3 games out of the final spot in the PAC to make the playoffs. The only team that they beat the first time around remaining on the schedule is Franciscan, so the odds are definitely against them to get in. You talked about how important Anton Baker has been to this team. Who else would you like to see step up in these final coming games?
Well, I mean, it's a team effort. Jansen Nazi kind of struggled to start off the year, but in the 2 games with that Matt Popek, he scored a lot of points for them. He had 16 against St. Vincent. A guy Ryan Felberg had 14, so it was a balanced scoring attack for Waynesburg in terms of shooting the basketball. Looking at the schedule, though, too, I mean, yes, they've only beat Franciscan on the remaining schedule, which has Westminster, Geneva, Grove City, W&J, Franciscan, and at Allegheny to round things out. But this past weekend in PAC basketball, it shows anybody can win. Bethany, a team that we were distraught, beat Waynesburg early this past weekend. They won by 18 points against Chatham, which was in 4th place in the PAC right now. Grove City beat Westminster on the road. And then, of all things, too, St. Vincent, the team Waynesburg just beat the number 1 team in the conference of W&J by 10 in overtime. So it really shows that anyone can beat anyone at this point in time in the PAC play, and they're just going to have to continue to play well.
A lot of inconsistencies in PAC play, as you said, but I mean, myself as a fan for the men's basketball, you've seen them show up some games and even against the hardest competition and compete or lose a close game like that. So what are some consistencies they need for this upcoming schedule, especially looking at Westminster, their next matchup?
I mean, defense is always, one thing that's got to be consistent. They're playing teams like, Westminster and Geneva come up, they're going to score. They're going to have, Tipton's coming to the building, or we're going to Geneva, but Tipton's going to be in the arena they're playing in. They're going to have to slow him down. They just have to play team defense, and they got to be able to just continue to do what they do on offense. Because believe it or not, everyone asks, "So what's Waynesburg going to do without Matt Popek in the lineup? How's their offense going to look?" Fun fact: they averaged 64 points per game with him in the lineup. In the last 2 games, they've averaged 64 points per game. So they've been able to score about the same amount. However, the defensive inconsistency has kind of been, the issue down the stretch for them.
Yeah. So last time out against Westminster, they lost 72-59. It wasn't really a close game by any means, and this Waynesburg team has kind of been underperforming compared to what many people thought they could potentially do after the season that they put together last year. So theoretically, if they lose out and they don't make the playoffs, or they win and lose but they still don't make the playoffs, do you think this really hurts the program, or do you think that they can still kind of take some steps to finish off in the right direction and still miss the playoffs?
I mean, look, there's a lot of guys on this team that have a lot of basketball still to be played in their careers. So, I mean, I think if anything, it could, if they do miss out on the playoffs, it could honestly fuel a lot of these guys for next year. I mean, you wonder coming into the season if, we were riding high because we had a good year last year and we kind of surprised a lot of people. We're going to be just fine this year doing what we do. A year like this might next year, propel these guys into a spot where they or even better. I mean, the only guy there's 2 guys on the roster that get significant playing time that will more than likely be gone last year would be Matt Popek and Ryan Felberg, and even Ryan Felberg has next year of eligibility left. And who knows, Matt Popek might somehow find another one. But either thing, I mean, they're a team that has a lot of experience, and they have guys that are going to have a chance to come back next year as well.
We've seen guys like Jansen Knotts and Scheidt start off their experience the younger in a Fusina offense, which is really, he picks his 7 or 8 guys and then they rotate through. So like you were saying, only the 2 players that we're expecting to move on after this season. Do you think that any of these freshmen have a lot of potential and maybe should get more time, especially if they become eliminated in the upcoming games?
Yeah, I mean, you look, they don't really run a lot of freshmen into the basketball game. The 2 that have really played majority off the bench for them, that being underclassmen, have been Scott Billivis and Trevor Button. And we've seen a lot more Scott Billivis than Trevor Button as of late. But they made 4 3-pointers against St. Vincent, and Scott Billivis made 2 of them. He also made 2 in the loss against Bethany last Saturday. So that's really the 2 freshmen that you can look at and say, well, these guys are getting time. And you got to give props to them whenever they come in. They do end up playing pretty well for the most part. But, and ultimately, I think, if they do get eliminated down the stretch, I think you do kind of experiment with some younger players and give them at least more minutes. I'm not saying you run them in the starting lineup, but instead of playing them, 5 to 10 minutes, maybe play them 15.
Thank you, Carter, for your breakdown of the Waynesburg men's basketball team. Coming up on Jacket Sports Weekly, we will have more coverage of basketball, but on to the women's side of things.
Welcome back to JSW. I am your host, Jesse Cain, alongside with me my co-host, Tyler Zeman, and we're going to talk about women's basketball. And for our analyst, Spencer Frattare, the losing streak continues. 5 straight losses. They've only won 2 games this season, and the upcoming games don't look too promising. They lost this past week to St. Vincent, 81-49. A lot of problems with the team. Just if you'd like to recap the past couple games and some struggles you see.
Yeah, we'll focus on the last 2 guys. They lost the last 2 by more than 20. They're 3 games out of the 8th spot. This team's going to have to find its identity here in the end of the stretch. And like you mentioned, a lot of tough games. They've got Grove City, they've got W&J. Those are both home games, and those are both very tough games. And they've got a lot of tough away games. But like I mentioned, they've really got to find their identity here in this late game stretch if they want to even squeeze into the playoffs. It's going to be close, but if they do squeeze in, they're going to have to do a lot of winning, and that winning's going to have to come fast.
Yeah, so you hit on it. They're 3 games out of that last playoff spot, and with 7 games remaining, maybe they get a few wins, maybe they lose out, but ultimately, what would you just like to see from this team to kind of finish on a strong note?
Yeah, there are a lot of freshmen on this team. We know it's a young team. We didn't really expect much from them. Anika Dansby, this is her senior season. Maybe she comes back next year, maybe not. But I'd love to see some of these freshmen blossom. We've seen Amacito blossom. She's almost averaging a double-double. She gets 6 points a game, 9 rebounds. With Avery Robinson questionable, we don't really know what's happening, the whole full effect of that. Amacito should really be averaging a double-double. She can score 10 points a game. We've seen her do it. We've seen her grab double-digit rebounds a game. So I'd love to see some of these freshmen. Amacito, I know Liv Amons is out. We'll see her more next year. But Madison Platt, Claire Page Miller, there's a ton of freshmen that really can blossom on this team. And I think next year will grow into great roles.
We've seen a lot of those younger players step up, get their minutes. They don't really have much of a choice, especially with Avery Robinson no longer on the roster. Anika Dansby, the only solo senior on the team. Who do you see to replace her next year? And maybe Coach Jones could focus on a freshman to replace her.
And while it might be a freshman, Jesse, I'm not unfortunately going to look to Marley Wolf. I think she's going to be the only senior now on the team with Avery Robinson gone, and she's been coming off the bench. I think she'll start next year almost undoubtedly, but I think Marley Wolf having a really good, decent junior year. She's been coming off the bench the second half of the season, playing really well. I think next year, her senior season, she's going to be that Brooke Forrest. She's going to be the one who scores most of the women's points, unless a freshman steps up big time. I'm going to love to see Marley Wolf really step into a bigger role here for this women's basketball team.
Yeah, and speaking of Marley Wolf, we saw Sam Jones make a bunch of changes over the winter break. And on a 5-game losing streak right now, do you see maybe Coach Jones kind of put Marley Wolf back in? Do you see him maybe mixing up the lineups?
Yeah, I don't really know if we fully know what to do with that situation, because Marley was a starter for the last 2 years, and then out of nowhere it was kind of, oh, you're going to the bench. And it was the same thing with Avery Robinson before she was taken off the roster. I think if you're 3 games out of the A spot, if you're Sam Jones who would like to squeeze into a playoff spot, I would throw Marley Wolf back in there. She's a junior. She's your pretty much main scorer right now, and Nika Dansby's been doing a little more scoring with Avery Robinson out. But I think Marley Wolf should be, in my opinion, thrown back into that lineup. She can provide great scoring. She's got a great 3-point shot, and she's got great attacking power.
So with the next couple games on the road, they haven't won a road game yet all season. Granted, they've only won 2 games. What do you see you talked a little bit about Coach Jones deciding to play Marley Wolf, or maybe because I know she's dealt with a couple injuries, maybe it's best if you focus on getting those freshmen. And like you talked about, Emma Cito, she could get that double-double. You even said she could be a replacement for Brooke Fuller. Do you see a big woman, a bigger player that can get in the paint for the Waynesburg basketball team and take over that center Brooke Fuller 6'2" spot?
I like Tori Weslovsky, guys, but I want to focus on Clara Page Miller. She's been coming off the bench all year. I played a little bit with her against her in a little tournament last year that Waynesburg held. I think she's got great potential, and once she gets to the offseason working over the summer this year, and she in her sophomore year will be next year, I think Clara Page Miller can really fill in that spot. She can be that big they need down low so desperately, because Tori Weslovsky is good, but she's not the fastest they have. She's oftentimes behind on plays on the defensive side, getting down to the other side. She's not there most of the times. So I think if you look at Clara Page, you give her a full summer of work, shooting, defense, all the things to evolve, I think she's going to have a great sophomore season.
Yeah, you talked about how you want Clara Page Miller to kind of step up here in the last couple of games. Who should we maybe expect to also see step up possibly in these last couple of games and then play an even bigger role in the team next season?
Yeah, well, besides Emma Cito, guys, Aubrey Burns, Madison Platt, Tori Weslovsky still has all these freshmen. This is a huge opportunity for them. It's a really, really young team. It's a lot of freshmen. You have Anika Dansby, who's a senior, Marley Wolf, who is a junior, and then you have Rayleigh Furlong, who's a sophomore. But there's really not much above all these freshmen, and there's going to be a lot of opportunities, just not at the end of this year, but the beginning of next season, for them to step up and make huge impacts for this women's basketball team.
Thank you, Spencer, for your insights on women's basketball. Once again, you're watching JSW, and we'll be right back after this break.
And lastly, here on Jacket Sports Weekly, we are joined by our men's and women's track and field analyst, Meg Berry. Meg, it was a very, very good outing at Muskingum a few weeks ago. Kind of just break down what happened. The women 2nd out of 8 teams, and then the men 6 out of 8.
Yeah, it was a very good meet. It was our first meet back since winter break. We did come back a little early just to get back into the swing of things, but it was a very good meet. Like you said, the men finished 6th out of 8. They had 8 people place on the track and 3 people place in the pits and in the field events. It was a very good overall meet. Kai Herbert won the high jump and took 3rd in the 60. We had multiple wins in the 200-meter dash with Zach Brott and Cole Thiek. We had Zach Brott also placing 4th overall in the 60. And mind you, there was D2 schools here, and we weren't actually competing against any teams in the pack. So from that, with just that statistic, you can tell how good this team has been. And then on the women's side, we had 8 females place on the track and 2 place in the pits with Becca Dolce. She actually beat the school record for the weight toss throw at this meet. She took 5th overall in weight toss, and then ended up taking 3rd overall in shot put as well. And to transfer to the track, we had Michaela Rose get 1st place in the 60 meter, and right behind her, Claire Klaus get 2nd place in the 60 meter. So it's a pretty dominant back and forth with just team, I guess, competition, you can say. But that just really pushes them to do better. And you can see that in the distance as well, with 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th place taken by distance runners for the girls in the 1,000-meter run. So it's a good team competition, which is really, I believe, helping us in all.
Now, Meg, I feel like the track and field team doesn't get as much love here with Jacket Sports Weekly and even Waynesburg Sports. Maybe that's because there's not a track on campus. But maybe you could talk about, as a member of the team, kind of the transition period from the indoor track and field to outdoor, and what happens within that transition period of pretty much 2 seasons back to back.
So indoor to outdoor is kind of a hard transition because there are events in outdoor that are much different than indoor. So for example, if you heard me before, I said that Kai Herbert and Zach Barat competed in the 60-meter hurdles and the 60-meter dash. And outdoor, that's obviously the 100-meter hurdles and the 100-meter dash. So obviously, like, events get longer, things get harder. You get some more field events like pole vault and discus and javelin, which you don't compete in indoor, you get that in outdoor. So it's just trying to find that repetition. So actually right now, as we head into February, we're trying to get outside as much as we possibly can. If we get a good weather day, we go outside, just because the season is right around the corner. March 1st, the outdoor season starts. So it's just getting that repetition of getting outside and taking advantage of the good weather that we get here.
Yeah, so Meg, both of these teams, the men's and women's, they're always very competitive in the PAC. So how much confidence does this kind of give you guys competing against Division II schools at a meet at Muskingum?
It definitely helps a lot because we compete against these bigger teams and these better athletes, obviously, if they're at D2 schools. And to compete against them well and to like actually put up a fight in a competition, it just boosts our confidence and makes us feel better when we go into this pack meet. And on top of that, I think as a team, it raises our morale and it makes us want to push each other to do better, to prove like, yes, it may be hard going against these D1 and D2 athletes because you have that mindset of, wow, they're better than me because they're at a more competitive school. But if you go into it as, I can compete against these people, and then you do place 1st and 2nd and get the title over them, it definitely is a confidence booster overall.
Well, let's talk about maybe one of the best members of the track and field team, especially this season, but throughout her entire history here at Waynesburg, Catherine Henderson. You said she broke 4 school records this past Saturday. Mm-hmm. Just talk a little bit about that and maybe the meet that happened this past Saturday.
So Kat and I wouldn't call us lifting partners, but you'll always catch us in the gym together. I strive to have dedication like her. She works her schedule around track practice in the weight room and stuff, and it's amazing. But yes, you're right. This weekend she competed in what's called the pentathlon. It is 5 events. It's shot put, high jump, the 60-meter hurdles, long jump, and an 800-meter. So those 5 events, you get scoring in them, and it adds up overall to be somewhere in the 1,000-point range. But this weekend, she broke 4 different school records. 2 of them she already had, which was the pentathlon record and the long jump record. But she broke them again this weekend. But then she broke 2 new school records this weekend, that being the high jump and the 60-meter hurdles. And mind you, this is only our 3rd meet of the year for indoor, but if you only want to look at it from the 2nd semester, this is only really the 2nd meet back. So she, on top of that, is currently ranked 10th in the nation in all of D3 when it comes to the pentathlon. And again, this is her first time competing in the pentathlon this season, and she's already 10th in the nation. So she's definitely come out of the gates ready to roll and to make a name for herself.
So Meg, how does having an athlete like Henderson help you guys as a team? She's always out there on top of the leaderboards. She kind of pushes you guys to be better, I would assume.
She definitely is on top of the leaderboards in every meet, but like I said, Kat has a really good dedication. She is extremely dedicated to the team and to herself and to her performance, but on top of that, she's extremely humble. Like at Muskingum, she did like a mini pentathlon before her pentathlon this weekend, and she competed in 4 events, and she placed in every single one of those events. And she got 1st in high, high jump, first in long jump, fourth in the shot put, and first in the 60-meter hurdles. So just within that day, she had an amazing day. And the whole time people were congratulating her, like stuff like that. But she was like, oh yeah, thanks, and then just kind of moved on. She's very humble and doesn't like to brag and things of that nature, which is, it's nice to see that. And she is a very good captain to the team. She's always running around, cheering on other people and making sure that someone is there cheering that person on. So even though her dedication and her competing at the level that she does is inspiring, her being a captain and just overall a very good person also helps tremendously.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have on the first episode of Jacket Sports Weekly. For Meg and all of our analysts, for Jesse Cain and myself, Tyler Zeman, stay tuned every Tuesday on WCTV for more Jacket Sports Weekly updates.
This has been a production of Waynesburg Community Television.